All right, you good? Yay! Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Bridges. I go to UNC Asheville, and I am so excited to have everyone on the call today. I was hoping that we could just start out maybe saying our name and school, and since we're talking about storytelling today, your favorite childhood book. And we can put those in the chat box, and I can just like read them out as we go. So if you folks want to do that. Okay, so I think we're going to wait just a second for some more people to get on the call. While we're waiting, just want to introduce Nick. Is it Stubler? Cool. Who goes to Denver, University of Denver, and is part of the Escalation Corps, which is a group of schools that's going to be having coordinated direct actions on their campuses in the coming weeks, which is awesome. We're just going to wait for some folks to get on the line. So if y'all can just be patient. Yeah, so for people who maybe just hopped on, we're going to have everyone just like type in your name and where you go to school or like where you're doing your campaign into the chat box. And if you could also answer just the question of your favorite childhood book, since we're talking about storytelling today. Um, and then I'll just read them out as they come. We might be having some lag issues, so just hang in there. Okay. So just in the effort of time, since we're having a little bit of trouble with the chat box, um, we're going to go ahead and just like jump in with the webinar. And if people can like figure out writing your name in and your school, that would be awesome as we go. But we're just going to hop in. And it'll start off kind of easy because I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit more. You know, kind of the power of storytelling is like at its core connecting to other people, and I want everyone here to like get to know me a little better. So I want to tell the story of why I got involved with divestment, and like the story that was told to me about the fossil fuel industry growing up and like how that's changed now. So I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a suburban area of Kentucky that's not really surrounded, like my neighborhood wasn't surrounded by like a lot of environmental justice issues. But when I was a teenager, I started learning a lot more about the extractive industry that was going on in my state, and that really honestly like rules the government of my state, which is mountaintop removal coal. which probably a lot of folks on this call have heard about. But if you haven't, it's a practice of mining that um, literally blows off the top of mountains to recover coal beneath. And it's incredibly destructive and causes a ton of health problems for people who live in the surrounding area. And when I learned about the practice, I was incredibly heartbroken and devastated that like this place that I love so much, the state that I love so much, could be like incurring such harm upon the communities that live there. But that's like the story that activists really know about mountaintop removal coal. But if you go into those towns, like places like Hazard and Whitesburg and these really coal towns, and you start asking questions and probing about the environmental consequences and health consequences of coal, people get really defensive and they get really angry because their economic security and livelihoods really depend on coal. And I was so interested in like how the story of like the dirtiest fossil fuel became one of reliance, like, and fierce defense rather than exploitation. And I think that there are like a lot of reasons for like how that became the dominant narrative, from like poor education in Kentucky and the stigma of poverty that like leads people to really protect their own and what they do have. But I think that like the story of these types of situations is often like given to people as a choice of like you get to have a job or you don't, rather than like you get to have a job and you get to have a healthy environment. So like the story that we don't hear is that people get to have like access to a healthy environment. And the reason that happened is because like the powers that be in Kentucky framed the story of coal without acknowledging the costs, and people and telling the people that like this was their only choice for a livelihood. So that's kind of like my story and like why I fight this fight. And maybe as we like continue to go through this webinar and as you think more and more about what we've learned after, I hope that you can take with you like your own stories and like thinking about like where you have come from and what you've been told about extraction, and maybe learn how to reframe that story so that we can learn how to change it to address the needs of our divestment campaigns, of our communities, and of ourselves. So that leads us into the very first section of the webinar and our first activity, which I'm going to ask Nick, and for folks who just hopped on, Nick is a student at University of Denver who is going to be involved with Escalation this spring. And has a little bit of background doing messaging and stuff. So I'm going to ask everyone, though, to participate in this reflection. I want you to think about an argument that you've had in your life. It could be any time, but an argument that just like really stands out as like an argument that was like one of the worst you've ever had. It could be with a family member, it could be with a friend, a roommate, someone you met in a coffee shop. But I want you to think about if you remember where you were in that moment and what the room looked like. If you can like place yourself there and what the argument felt like, think about it. Like close your eyes if you have to. Did you feel like you needed to leave the room or just yell as loud as you could, slam a door? Think about the issues that you were talking about. Can you remember like specific things that were said? So I'm going to ask Nick what his moment was, but I want everyone who's listening to just kind of like hold what they were thinking as we we work through his example.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so the topic that first came to my mind was a discussion that I had. One of the first discussions I had with one of the individuals I was studying abroad with in India 2 winters ago. And so we were sitting in a little Indian cafe and kind of just talking about issues that we're interested in and stuff that we're involved with back home. And so I began talking about activism and just like the importance of being engaged with what's going on in our world and the issues that were going on. And so the conversation quickly turned to, I guess, his perspective of nihilism and just questioning why anything that we do matters. And so for really every issue we brought up, like if we talked about species extinction, he would mention that like polar bears the polar bear doesn't care if it goes extinct. That's a human construct for us to be holding on to. And the humans are more concerned about the extinction of polar bears than the polar bears are. And so the argument, I guess, took a lot of these different forms, but it was just, I think, so frustrating for me for 2 reasons. The first being it was just kind of contradicting everything that I guess, closely believed and held regarding just the importance of us taking action to build a more just and sustainable future. But it was also frustrating just by, I guess, his lack of engagement, and what I saw in that attitude was just like, I guess, what I see as one of the biggest problems with our generation moving forward and addressing these issues that are so salient to our futures. And so yeah, I guess to answer a little bit more about your questions, Aaron, like whenever I would bring up a fact to argue, he would very quickly bring up a counter argument that was not rooted in fact. And I think that's what threw me off so much was the way he was framing the conversation away from what I was believing in into a whole nother avenue.
Totally. Yeah, you know, like what stuck out with me from that story is like you talking about how everything that he said seemed to just completely counteract everything you had ever believed in, like your beliefs and like the deepest values that you have, which I think is like very common in the arguments that are like stand out to us the most. You know, like I think about arguments that I've had with my family that are similar. It's just like when you're in those situations, you can't even believe how someone could ever even say that, because it's like it goes to like the core of everything that you hold dear. Totally. So thank you so much for sharing, Nick. And I know I can't hear from everyone who's like on the line talking right now, but think about like the story that you had in mind, and think about like what the issues you were talking about. And I want to just like point out that oftentimes like these intensely heated arguments that we have are really similar to like the arguments that we're having on our campuses with the institutions that we're trying to talk to and shift and change. Because it hurts so much because like the values that we hold are so different or drastic, and like it's just really tough to be fighting those things, you know. But this goes to kind of like our very first learning for this thing, which is that values are really like the currency of our campaigns and of our messaging instead of the facts. You know, like Nick brought up that he was trying to give like maybe specific facts about the polar bears dying, and this guy was just like not having it. But maybe if Nick had like drawn on some of the values that this other guy had held, or like reframed the argument in another way, it could have gone a little bit more smoothly and not be like one of like the worst arguments you've ever had that you remember to this day, you know. So if people are like writing stuff down right now, I want you to write this down and remember when you're creating messaging for your campaigns. Remember that it's not the facts that are important. I mean, they are important, but they don't really motivate most people. Stories communicate values, and values create meaning. So just remember that. I'm going to try and pull up a slide here to show that. Just give me 1 second. Almost there. Okay. Okay. Can everyone see that? Or I guess you can't answer, but Nick, can you see that? Cool. So yeah, just so that like we have this ingrained in our minds, stories communicate values, and values create meaning. All right. So on we go. I want to also throw up this really quick quote that I think will lead us well into the next section, which is activists assume that if something is true, people will find it meaningful. The opposite is true. If something is meaningful, people believe it to be true. So we can really take this to our campaigns for like really, really powerful storytelling and really powerful messaging. So values can be framed in a lot of different ways, and moments in our campaign can be framed in a lot of different ways. So we're going to kind of dive into the values that we're like talking about and sharing, and how to bring them to the conversation through framing. So a frame is like the way that a debate is limited by like the story that's on the table. It's the story that's told or left out. And oftentimes when we're launching divestment campaigns, the frame that we hear the most starts out with like how the administration sees divestment. But I'd like to share another quote just to like introduce this, which is, in politics, whoever frames the debate tends to win the debate. So we're going to talk to Nick again to hear an example of a time that, or like just his story about like framing on campus and how doing like messaging, intentional messaging, like changed the conversation. So be thinking about this yourself as we go through it again, and definitely bring back this conversation to the groups on your campus, because it's amazing, like, if we learn how to reframe the story about divestment, then, like, we get to decide what the administration is even choosing. So we're going to go to Nick here. I want to ask you what your campaign's messaging looked like before you understood how to frame a debate, like before you even knew what a frame was.
Yeah, totally. So this was, looking back, clearly one of the, probably the greatest weakness of our campaign at the University of Denver in the first year, and the first time we had the opportunity to present to the board. And we did nothing to set the frame or reset the frame or tell our own narrative. We were just speaking to the narrative that was being put forth by our board and by our administration. And that was all about divestment being an issue of finances, both in terms of the financial impact of divestment, and they would discuss that divestment was not going to have a significant financial repercussions on the fossil fuel industry and thus not drive effective action on addressing climate change. but also that divestment would hurt financial aid to students. And so they were just so wrapped up in the issue of the finances of divestment. And this was a poor strategy for us for a number of reasons. I mean, first, the individuals we were talking with on the board, they've been CFOs and CEOs for the past few decades of their lives. They're much more financially literate, at least in terms of mainstream economics than we were. So when we started entering these discussions with them, they were very easily able to kind of swipe our arguments aside and bring up points that we were not perhaps as prepared to engage with. But I think most importantly is that it was ignoring the real issue of divestment and the reason that we're fighting for this issue in the first place. And that is the moral issue of divestment and the urgency with which it's facing our planet. As soon as we began to shift the frame towards this issue of morals, towards the idea that as agents with the ability to affect positive change and as informed human beings about climate change, that our board had the moral responsibility to be acting on these issues, reframing the issue of climate change into an issue of human rights, and talking about the indefeasible rights every human has, present and future, to live on a safe and hospitable planet, and really grounding the discussion in the intersectionality of climate change, and kind of reframing climate change as an issue of racial justice, as well as simply environmental justice. And so shifting this narrative into the moral framework has been incredibly powerful. It gives us the high ground for every one of our interactions. And simply put, the administration and board of trustees are not able to win arguments when we're framing them in terms of morals and ethics. And so this slight little shift in our narrative has completely shifted the power structure in the campaign. And I think is what is making our administration so nervous about, I guess, the progress of this campaign moving forward.
That's so awesome. I definitely have like very similar stories about maybe going in and out of so many meetings with the administration, like arguing about finances. And like if we would go up to a student on our campus, they would have no idea what divestment was, or if they did, it would be like within the financial sector, which is probably similar to what, I mean, at least what I'm hearing from you. And like that's so incredible and so powerful that you all were able to like reclaim your story, reclaim like your stake. And now the campus is like, you're posing this question that everyone on campus knows that they're answering of like, are you going to invest in like the death of millions of people or our future? And if they have no way, like how are they going to say they're going to invest in the death of millions of people? And like that's incredible that we're able to like kind of manipulate that story in an incredibly truthful and powerful way. Like you're saying, it's like we're reclaiming our power, and it's awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to add before I show the just like what an effective frame looks like to everyone?
Yeah, I guess a quick point. Just the importance of keeping all of our media and everything that we're doing publicly in line with this frame. So whether that's writing an op-ed for our paper or the post that we're sharing on Facebook or the conversations we're having while tabling, just ensuring that we're always grounding the discussion in that narrative and just reiterating it to the point where everyone on campus is very familiar with this frame. Because it's when you ground it that deeply in it that the administration are forced to really start addressing it from that same frame.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. So I'm going to just share really quickly with everyone like what an effective frame even should look like. because we're throwing out that term like frame a lot. And just to like wrap our minds around it a little more. Here's a fun little acronym that y'all should write down, and again bring back to your campaigns. So the first part of an effective frame, it frames the conflict on our terms. So we heard Nick say that like they started talking about climate disaster instead of finances, which is similar to reframing away from the opponent's story. The third part is just that frames are accessible to our audience. And that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean that it's like easy to understand, short so that everyone knows what the frame is. And maybe it's like kind of positive so like people feel good about like being involved with it. And like the way that you're framing climate change. The fourth part is that it's memeable. I mean, we're in the 21st century, so like whatever frame that you choose, whatever slogan you choose should be able to be put like quickly into like a symbol or into an image, and put on flyers and stuff. And it should be emotional, connect to real world impact on people's lives. Like finances are really exciting for some people, but you know, for like the average person, the things that like are really going to make us want to fight are like impending climate disaster and the fact that like our generation is like facing a really scary future. And then lastly, the frame and the message should be simple and short. It should be distilled to its core, which can be difficult at first when you're just like thinking and overwhelmed by all the different things you want to say about climate change. But just remember that like you don't want to read a 5-paragraph essay someone wrote on Facebook. You want to read a really cute and funny tweet, because like that's what sticks in our minds. And so our messages on our campaigns should be like that as well. All right. So let's see. So like I was saying, it can maybe feel pretty overwhelming, like trying to figure out what your messages are going to be. I mean, hearing all of that, that's like a lot of information to hold. But there's a really great model that you can like plug in your messages to just like get started on this. And I'm going to show it just really quickly. It's just, let's see here. All right, so powerful messages should create conflict and choice. Write that down, conflict and choice. For example, you might present something to in an op-ed that's like, there is a choice before the board of trustees today. They can choose the future for our generation or continued investment in the biggest injustice of our time. And choose like the side of the students or something like that. And that can really create this model is really good down to its core, while also pinpointing your target and forcing them to make a choice on the frame that you choose. So I don't know, Nick, do you have any examples of anything like that fits that model that you have used at Denver this semester?
Yeah, definitely. So for all of our messaging the past year, we've always framed it as Chancellor Chop, what side are you on? But just always ending on having our public target being given this choice. And so we're always setting it up in a way that that shows that our public target, the chancellor of our school, has the capacity and the agency to make this choice, and that it's simply up to her to act. And so, again, so it's framing it as a conflict. So we're always grounding something in the conflict. So, for example, on the last things we were getting ready to escalate around was the lack of transparency from the administration towards the student body in regards to where our finances are invested. And so setting that conflict up as their refusal to be honest and transparent with the student body, which I think pulls to the values of a lot of the students who believe that if they're paying money to go to the school, they have a right to know where their money is being put towards. And then framing it with that choice of, like the chancellor, you have this information and you can give it to us. What side are you on? Are you on the side of these fossil fuel industries who are perpetuating the climate crisis, or are you on the side of your students and of your community members here?
Thank you so much, Nick. That's super helpful. Yeah, that continued target is like so important to like force that on. So thank you for bringing that. That was like kind of a lot of information, and I want to invite questions from anyone who is listening to type in your chat box. Victoria, who is running our tech, will like send them to us. So if anyone has any questions about like maybe what a frame is, if you want us to like continue or anything. Can answer. So let them fire.
Okay, I have got one. And you can ask questions by writing it in the chat or tweeting at Escalation Core Webinar. So this question is, there are so many aspects of the climate justice movement. How do we distill it all into one choice?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. There's a lot of different ways that you could pose the choice. I'm hoping that later on in this webinar that we can like share some of the frames and messages that the Escalation Core is already using, so that like it doesn't seem so overwhelming and it can maybe get you on track. So one that comes to mind is there's too much at risk to do nothing. And that's like a message that you would use just like starting out in your campaign. We're like building. Because like with any story, it's going to be along this like story arc. So that can help you choose your message as you like choose what actions you're doing. You might build it into something more escalatory, like signed on to participate in this direct action because there's no time to wait for like imminent climate destruction or like something like that. But we'll give you some examples, concrete examples that you can like go by in a few minutes. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, we've got one from Allison Hostman. We are escalating this spring and we have a lot of backing from faculty. Has reaching out to faculty been effective? Nick, do you have
Yeah, no, I would love to hop on that. The faculty support is really invaluable. So I guess to take a step back, by no means is having very public faculty support necessary for effective escalation, but it is quite very helpful. The faculty support just helps to legitimize the actions that you may be taking. and enables and I guess prevents the administration from being able to just so offhandedly discard it as irrelevant, and that these students are just being crazy students. So yeah, I think it's important to be engaged, like building a few key allies within the faculty that you can be sharing these whether they're press releases or just updates about the escalation. Because when the administration really starts to feel worried is that when your escalation is getting students and faculty talking about this on campus, that's when they really start to I think feel the pressure and start moving your direction. So yeah, I would say keep on reaching out to faculty, develop a few faculty members that you can really have a very positive relationship with and that you can be asking to take actions for you. So for example, asking them to send out messages to their colleagues, perhaps creating a faculty open letter for them to be signing, and empowering those faculty members to be organizing on your behalf, because that makes the administration really feel the pressure.
Yes, that's so true. I want to just say that, like, as long as like the faculty seem to be on your side, I really don't see how it could go wrong. Reaching out to them and like having them be public about it, just like you're saying, like that's just another legitimizer. So that's awesome that you like have that. All right, so we have another one from Michaela. She said, different action tactic framings for effective narrative or communication of narrative. Do you have tips or ideas for matching narrative with different kinds of actions? Let me know if I should clarify. Totally. Well, the first thing that makes me think of is just like, you don't want to like have like a sit-in in February of the year when like you haven't had any other actions, and like students on your campus are going to be like, who are these kids, you know? So you're going to start with your narrative where you are, just like you're asking. That's like totally perfect. Like you want to start with just like that warning or posing that conflict and choice to the students on your campus, and like giving the administration like the frame, you know, like we might be framing it within like the campus is investing in the most destructive industry of our time. We as students like can't wait for their answer. And that's not saying like further down the line you can't be like, the students' voices have been heard and the administration has not answered. Like they have chosen the side of destruction. So like maybe that, I hope that helps. If not, like please write back in and clarify. And Nick, if you have anything to hop in on, just let me know. You're just hop in.
Yeah, that was, I mean, perfect. I think that the framing itself doesn't necessarily change a ton based on the actions, but the actions change a ton in the way those frames are perhaps being articulated. So for example, always saying, like, grounding the issue in the urgency of the climate crisis, and the threat, the imminent threat that it poses to humanity. And so no matter if you're just doing an event on the campus green or if you're doing a sit-in, no matter what, you can be grounding it in that same frame. But then based on the power that you've built on campus and the support that you have from the student body and even faculty, then you can kind of word those frames perhaps more direct and more powerfully. So rather than perhaps at the very beginning saying, the urgency of the climate crisis demands an answer, President Smith, what side are you on? At the beginning, you can move towards the urgency of the climate crisis demand a response, like, and then it's like, we demand that President Smith give an answer by here. so yeah, I guess based on the power that you feel that you have and the authority that you're speaking to the administration, you can be narrating the frame differently, but I think it always stays very rooted in that moral side and the side of the crisis that we have the high ground on. Always have the high ground on.
Definitely. Cool. Do you have any other questions, Victoria?
No.
Well, there will be like 5 minutes at the end of the call if anyone needs clarification on anything. So feel free to like keep posting questions, keep tweeting. It's hashtag escalation core webinar. So, but it sounds like we need to talk a little bit more maybe about the frames of the movement that are like already going on and like the different stages of the narrative that we want to tell. And we have some of the escalation messaging that some of the schools are going to be using this semester already that we can share with you all, which is going to be really great. But I just want to like hone in on that question that Michaela asked, which is like, how do we know what narrative to use with what action? And I think a really great way to kind of like think about that is to think about, you know, think about when you first learned about how to like analyze a story or like analyze a book. Because like we're going to be telling stories about our divestment campaigns in a similar way. So like when we first met, there was a setting, which could be like our frames, and there were actors, and there was a protagonist and an antagonist in the book, and there's a lot of conflict in the beginning of the book, like maybe between this protagonist and antagonist, and a lot of character development of those main actors. And like within our divestment campaign, we want to have those actors and be very public about them. So choosing our antagonist or our very public target who has the power to choose on the question of divestment and painting a picture of like what that person looks like is really important in those first steps of your campaign and like the first few months of your campaign. But then as like our story keeps going, the conflicts get more heated and it kind of rises into this big action in the book, which is similar to our campaign, which could be like a big escalatory action. And we're going to see like in April a lot of coordinated actions across the country of students rising up, and they're going to be throwing out similar messaging on their campaigns, which is amazing. It's like so powerful. And then there's like the end of the book where like the protagonist is like winning and we're claiming victory. And this is like our chance to really take the power of the story back. Even if our school didn't divest, or even if they did through our messaging, is that we get our through op-eds and through stories that are written by like the school newspaper or maybe the city newspaper, and not just like being out on the quad yelling every day about what our message is going to be, because that's just not as effective. Maybe like the faculty members that you are mentioning could use your messaging in like a personal letter that they write, or that gets published in a newspaper. So take with you that like these stories should happen in an arc and that our messages happen in an arc. Let's see. So let's see here. I guess we'll just go into like sharing the messaging for this semester. Does that sound cool? I don't know if, Nick, you want to add anything here? I thought we could just like go into the messaging, and if you have like actually used some of it already this year, you could talk about what that looked like and how you got that message out into the campus community. Cool. So here we go. The first step really is just like setting up the conflict and choice, which we don't have like a specific message that I want to share with you all today, just because like that will shift on your campus. Like basically you're just like, you could be like, whose side are you on? And then we go into the warning and threat stage. So yeah. All right. Can you all see that? Is that visible? So this stage is warning and threat. And two broad messages that I pulled from the escalation messaging is the climate crisis is violence. And the second one is there is too much at risk to do nothing. Nick, have you used these at all or used something similar for your warning and threat stage early on in escalation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe the word we use the most is, or draw the most, is the urgency. So we're always just like bringing up that the urgency of the crisis demands our action. Again, because that in itself disarms so many of the arguments that might be put forth about needing to wait to see things or pushing it down to another meeting. And in effect, it justifies all the actions that you're planning to do moving forward. So it's always grounding it in the urgency, and then I think just also in making sure to focus that the threat, framing the threat in a very intersectional lens, in terms like the global south is going to be the populations most significantly impacted by this urgent threat, that marginalized communities here in the States are going to be the ones to be first hit and hardest hit by climate change. So not only grounding these threats in their urgency, but also in the reality that they're going to be affecting the marginalized and disenfranchised communities the most.
Absolutely. Right. And like that's the story we want to tell too. I mean, yeah, we don't want divestment to just be about the money and like the campus. We want to be talking about like the impacts of climate change. So, and like who is going to be hit first. So I love that you brought that in. All right, so the next stage, and we're going to go through these kind of quickly because we only have 7 minutes, and I want to make sure that like in the last couple of minutes we can answer any like burning questions that people have. So the next step is preparing for escalation, and some frames/messages that the escalation core is going to be using are: we are angry and hungry for change, and we stand together. Students across the country are preparing to take coordinated, direct action for a just transition away from an extractive economy. Which is awesome! Like, nowhere in there are we talking about, like, returns on investments. We're, like, talking about student power and, like, the power of rising up. And, like, it's emotional, and it's something that, like, people can jump onto, you know? Like, we're angry, and we want change. And like maybe if you brought in your target here, you're like, Chancellor so-and-so has the power to choose. Cool. And then our next step will be taking action, like the moment that we actually escalate and what that can look like. And these are just like examples that you all can use, but I hope that it's helpful just to like see them. You're not like stuck with like these messages. Okay, so the next one, our institutions have left us no choice but to escalate. Target name, so like for me, maybe that might be like Chancellor Grant, make history, or be vilified by it. Super, super powerful. and like gets that target in there like really amazingly, and makes them look really bad if they don't choose your side. And then the last one is like one of the most important pieces that we can't forget to do after we escalate, which is claiming victory. And this is like your chance to be like, we participated in like the largest direct action ever on our campus, and it was for like this cause, this target, this person chose the wrong side, and like we showed our power. So like I said, like even if your campus chose not to divest despite your escalatory efforts, you can still claim victory. Here's an example of something the Escalation Corps came up with. The movement has spoken. Our generation has already made a choice about our future. The debate on the fossil fuel industry is over. And maybe you could even end that by saying, like, this board member chose to not stand with us, despite, like, the entire community rising up for this cause, you know? So it's like these messages are really big because that's what catches people's eyes, and they're short, they're emotional, and they hit really hard, and that's so exciting because like it allows us to really claim our power back, and like do the good, you know, fight the good fight. Nick, if you want to like hop in on anything I just said, feel free. And if we get any more questions as you talk, I'll throw them out there and we can answer. So please feel free to like put your questions in.
Cool. Yeah, the two things that, I mean, a lot of stuff resonated, but the two of the things that really resonated with me is kind of the power of framing these escalations as not just your campus, but in a national movement. Because in terms of students, it can seem isolating to be on your own finite campus working against the fossil fuel industry. And so like by telling these stories to students that we are united with students across the country, like I just got off a webinar with people from across the country to talk about this. I think it's very empowering to the students. And it's also super threatening to administration. So for example, when our administration found out that two of our members went to New York for 3 days to meet with the Escalation Corps from 8 campuses across the country, again, that just legitimizes all the actions you're taking and makes them take you much more seriously. And then the last thing is just that importance of claiming victory, just no matter what, always claiming victory, but then always with like a tiny caveat of like, and now here's what we're going to be doing. Again, it can be when with these campaigns, it can be a bit disempowering to always just be fighting. And especially to those members who are perhaps less involved, nobody wants to be a part of a losing team. And first and foremost, none of our campaigns are losing right now. But it's important for everyone to realize just how powerful we are. And framing it as we're winning, we're getting closer and closer and closer. That makes general members much more interested in being involved in what's going on and wanting to give their time and their energies towards being a part of this winning movement.
Definitely. So we have a question here that maybe Nick you could answer, and I can hop in if you want. But it says, I work on a campaign that has used moral and human rights messaging from the start. However, our committee has not responded well to this messaging and continually just thinks that the issue is not a moral one. How can we reframe to combat this?
Great. Well, first off, like, fantastic job from doing the framing right from the beginning. Again, so the reason why the committee is rejecting that frame is because it's not a good frame for them. It's not a powerful frame. And so they're going to be doing all that they can do to, again, reframe the discussion in a way that's very positive to them in terms of these financial implications, yada, yada, yada. And so again, just staying resolute to that frame is the first thing. But then for them to really take these messages seriously, it's just important to be demonstrating that wide public support behind it. When you have the student support behind you, it's much more difficult for them to start denouncing this. And the thing that they want least is to be called out on refusing to engage with this issue as a moral issue. So what we started doing was we started sending the decision makers on our campus an update every few weeks with just stories that were strictly about climate change and the ethical implications it's going to have on our generation and future generations. So again, I wouldn't shy away from that. They're doing what they're doing the same thing that we're trying to do. They can't be as effective at it as us because of I guess the power of the argument that we're coming from. Hopefully that was helpful. But yeah, don't stray away from it. Just build power, and they will turn. And once they turn, then it's everything's going to start going in your favor.
Yeah, and just really quickly, just adding on to that, like, it's okay if they aren't responding to your moral arguments, because that just makes them look worse, and you can kind of like exploit that non-answer from them in the public and in the media that you push out, and like the way that you are organizing your students, because that's incredibly powerful for them to be like, no, we're not on the side of a future for our students. Then you can just be like, quote, that's what they said, you know, and it makes them look really bad, and like will push them towards divestment in the future. So I hope that helps with your struggle, but I definitely hear you on that. So we're at 7:02 right now. I want to thank everyone for coming. If you have any more questions, like, feel free, I guess, to put them in the Facebook page even, and we can answer you on there. I'm so happy that for those who have stuck around this whole time, you have, and I hope that you got a lot out of this and realized that powerful storytelling can mean the difference between, like, you know, feeling really excited about your work and not. So like step into that and like get loud, get prophetic about what you're saying, and feel free to use the messages that we gave out today. So thank you all. And thank you, Nick.
Thank you everybody so much for all the work that you're doing. Yeah, the spring's going to be pretty exciting, I think, for all of our campaigns.